order. I will now read the appeal statement. Pursuant to the provisions of 2.68030 of the Metropolitan Code of Laws, please take notice that decisions of the Metropolitan Government of Nashville and Davidson County Community Oversight Board may be appealed to the Chancery Court of Davidson County for review under a law of writ of certiorari. An appeal must be filed within 60 days after entry of a final decision by the board. Any person or other entity considering an appeal should consult with an attorney to ensure that time and procedural requirements are met. And next on the agenda is, we do have a quorum. And next on the agenda is the approval of the minutes. Are there any necessary corrections to the minutes? Hearing none, I'll entertain a motion to approve the minutes.
So moved.
Second.
It's been properly moved and second by Dr. Hildreth and second by Mr. Milliner. Is there any focused discussion? All in favor of the motion to approve the minutes, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, say no. The minutes are approved. Next on the agenda is my chair remarks. First, on the mass killing in Texas. At the last executive committee meeting, just 1 week ago, I asked for a moment of silence in memory of the victims of the Buffalo and California mass killings. Now we have another mass killing of children and their teachers in Texas. 2 years ago, the murder of George Floyd. Almost 10 years ago, the murder of the children of Sandy Hook. In honor of the victim's family, I will not ask for a moment of silence. But for those that are left behind, I ask them to speak up for change. As a person of faith, I do ask for prayer, but that it be followed up by action. And now I'd like to speak a little bit about the budget. I applaud the mayor for focusing on equity in this year's budget cycle. However, this perceived fairness is missing when it comes to the necessary resources for the community oversight staff. Regretfully, the mayor's recommended budget only grants 4 of the 9 positions requested by the MNCO budget and continues to put the COB below the penny standard. Community oversight boards receiving a penny for every dollar spent on police departments is becoming the standard. In spite of this setback in much needed staff positions, Executive Director Fitchard and I continue to engage the Metro Council in order to obtain the necessary resources for the COB. Hopefully our council will provide MNCO with the needed resources. And now, comment on the Oversight Board meeting of last week. And I just say again, I welcome more of these. And based on some of the actions that occurred during the last board meeting, it would be helpful for us to explain the rules and protocols of the meeting to the community. And some of this education should improve with our new community liaison. Resignation and appointments. During the last executive committee meeting, Ms. Michaela McCree resigned from her newly elected position of secretary on the executive committee. According to the bylaws, the chair is designated to make this appointment. If he is willing to serve, I would like to appoint Mr. Drew Goddard as the secretary of the executive committee if he's willing.
Thank you very much. Yes, I am willing.
Welcome again to the Executive Committee as Secretary. Also, I would like to exercise my right as Chair to appoint an additional voting member to the Executive Committee. Having to have 3 of 4 members present to have a quorum for the Executive Committee has periodically presented a challenge. This situation hampers the overall work of the COB, so I would like to appoint Mr. Walter Holloway as our additional Executive Committee board member if he is willing to serve.
You caught me by surprise, but I accept.
Welcome to the Executive Committee, Mr. Holloway. Thank you. Now, performance evaluation for the Executive Director. According to our bylaws, the Executive Committee shall conduct an evaluation of the Executive Director and submit a report to the board. I'm in the process of taking the necessary steps to make this happen. And also my board status as chair and board member as of August the 4th. According to the charter, referendum, and our bylaws, spouses of elected officials are ineligible to serve on the board. That being said, after the Davidson County general election on August 4th, I will become the spouse of an elected official. So regretfully, I will have to resign from the Community Oversight Board effective August the 4th. We are starting to take the necessary steps to ensure a smooth transition to the next chair and to make Nashville aware that there will be an open slot to serve on the Community Oversight Board. Know that I plan to continue to be engaged in the work of the COB, but as a non-board member. Thank you, and next on the agenda is our Executive Director's report. Director Fitcher, you have the floor.
All right, thank you. So we've had some exciting news. We have a personnel update. We welcome Ms. Damika Robinson to the MNCO as the new community liaison. She started on Monday. We're excited to have her. She spent 9 years as a Metro public school teacher at Cambridge High School, Teacher of the Year, and is really just really a remarkable young woman. I'm excited to have her on our team. We will post a vacancy announcement for the MNCO Research 2 position. I'm going to get that done next week, so that'll be open. And so I encourage you to ask anyone that you know that might be interested in research to apply. We continue to have trainings. I will say that our investigative staff just took an internal affairs training. It was a 4-week training. They are now certified in investigations, and so I'm very exciting about it. It's been very exciting because they did have to take a test to become certified. They got their certificates, and so it was a pretty rigorous course. But I'm very happy to say that we have now 3 certified investigators on our staff. We also, I've been attending the Metro Human Resources Executive Leadership Training and some other Metro HR training on safety and injury on duties. The Legal Resource Advisor, Attorney Yoon, he participated in some lab training, movement law, which is has a think tank with emphasis in policy and strategy efforts. I attended multiple meetings this month, one with the Partners in Care, with the Criminal Justice Planning Advisory Committee, one with the Justice Integration Systems, and I'll get into that a little later in my report. I do have a meeting set up with the Nashville Conflict Resolution Center in regards to mediation, and we met with the Mayor's Office, Mike Lacey, to discuss some community safety initiatives. with community outreach, I'm just very happy to have a liaison because we haven't been able to do a whole lot of outreach, not us doing it, but we have people reach out to us and invite us to engage in some of the work that they're doing. I was a guest on WPLN's This is Nashville today, which was really a sobering type of very emotional, very heavy to see the survivors who have lost loved ones because of a police-involved shooting. But it was really good to see them and know that they continue to support the work that we're doing and want us to continue doing it. It's important work here in the city, and that was 3 survivors of police shootings that happened within the last year. I also was met with a group called the National Action Network to share our information. They were interested in what was happening in Nashville within the community and what was the COB. And so I was able just to give them some information regarding that. As it pertains to, if you look at your report, you'll see that the legal resource and the researchers have been very, very busy this month. I mean, we've done a lot of meetings and outreach in that way. I won't name all the things that they've done, but they've reached out and talked to a lot of different agencies. One of the things I will say is that research analyst Williamson Crowell is attending the meetings in regards to the Partners in Care initiative. And so he has been on those, in those meetings. And I will say that Partners in Care is expanding their services. So they will be at the Central Precinct starting in June. And so now it'll be Hermitage North and now Central, where they will have that Partners in Care with the mental health co-op. They're also working on a new initiative where it would be a response that does not include law enforcement. They have been working with the Denver for their STAR. So the Denver model is called the STAR model. So they're working. They're going to be going to Denver to talk to them about that model, but they have received funding to have a co-response that does not include law enforcement. So hopefully we'll get more information on that. It will be, I'm sure in the next few months that we will have more information on that, which is very exciting for this city, not to, because many calls as they receive for mental health and crises calls, it would be really good to have a model that does not include law enforcement and see how that pilot will work and what the outcomes are. Our investigations have increased, complaints and calls. This month we received 10, which is, I think, the most that we've ever received in the course of a month. People are calling. And they're ranging from all types of complaints, and some of them they're not like old. Some people like hear about us and then they're 6 months ago, but these are things that are happening in real time, and so people are using our services for that. So I'm very happy about that. We've also referred 2 cases for mediation, so we're waiting to get those set up. And also, when I was speaking to Sarah Fickle at NCRC, we had a meeting about it. Talking to her, we realized that maybe, the investigators haven't had the information or the tools to talk about mediation to the complainant, and in a way that the complainant understands that it's not that we're not willing to investigate their cases. I do think that we have not used mediation enough, and so hopefully sitting with her and some of people on her team, we will learn how to approach mediation with the complainant in a very trauma-informed way, and so that's going to happen next month. We're going to work on that, and also try to expand the mediation. I think it's in our MOU that we would work together with the Office of Professional Accountability to set up some sort of mediation, and we haven't done that yet. But I think that, of course, having more investigators, we need to have that in place, and so that's something that we will be working towards in this summer to try to get our mediation program up and running. And she's still willing to take our cases. And so because we haven't utilized it, so we're still like in the newness of it. But we do have 2 that have been referred for them, and hopefully we will get those resolved, and I'll keep you posted on that. We have one proposed resolution report for this month. I have a force review board hearing on Thursday, which is tomorrow. I will say that as it pertains to the budget, myself and Chair Hayes attended a public meeting on this year's budget. That was on the 14th. And council members Suara, Mendez, and Allen were there. And then Councilmember Suara asked me would I attend the meeting on this Saturday at 3:00. It's the public safety budget talk, and it's going to include the police department, the COB, I think violence interruption, and she named one other group that will be there to participate, and she thought it would be a really lively and robust conversation, and she wanted us to take part in that. So I told her I would. And I will say, and I think you all know that we had the mayor's administration approved, and I'm very thankful that they approved the 2 investigators, an administrative manager, and a professional specialist. But as I explained in the last meeting, and if you got my questionnaire, some of the positions that we didn't get, in order for us to really move forward in our investigations without continuously being in a backlog, we have to have a legal assistant. Some of the positions are pathways to get us out of where we are. So increasing our investigative staff without having a legal assistant is not going to really help us move forward. So all of that is pretty much explained in the questionnaire. So if you have any questions about that, just let me know. There is and so I want to talk a little bit about justice integration systems. So over the course of the last few months, I've been trying to reach out to Metro ITS in regards to I've talked to you all about Civil, which is a case management system that we've been interested in. And after talking to or sending back and forth emails to the director of ITS, he said that they really don't have the capacity to be able to do that. And so I had already mentioned to him that JIS was an alternative for us, Justice Integration System. So I reached out to JIS. And the committee said that they would meet with me. That committee chairperson was Judge Mondelli. So myself and research analyst Williamson, we went to meet with the committee, which was CJ stakeholders, the public defender, the Metro clerk, someone from juvenile justice, and then multiple judges were there from criminal court judges as well as general session judges. And then there was one from the civil branch or chancery court. And they asked us lots of questions about the work that we do. Why did we think it was important to be with JIS? JIS is Justice Integration Systems. They handle they handle all the criminal justice agencies in this city. So they include the criminal courts, the jails, the court system, as well as criminal justice planning and a few others. And so one of the things that I thought it would be really helpful, number one, they're a smaller agency. They have all the safety that we would need to protect our information, as well as it would give us the distinction of a criminal justice agency. And if you know, I've been kind of fighting for that for a long time because we are a criminal justice agency. And so we would have that distinction once we've had. So it was approved unanimously by that committee. They're going to move us forward to the bigger committee in June and take a vote on that. So I'm hoping that we can get this done through working with Ms. Steers and then getting Civil up and running. I will say that she was really pleased with what Civil had to offer. Number one, they are CJIS approved. They also are dealing with I think it's called Gov Cloud, Fed Gov Cloud. So they have all the credentials. She thought that was great, and they don't have to take up a lot of space because everything would be in the cloud. So I'm very happy about that. So that has been a very, I think it's just really been successful, and I'm looking forward to that partnership. I also reached out to the property director. There's a new property director for Metro. His name is Mr. Abraham Westcott. He just got here, I think, last week, and talked to him about office space. We still continue to, we have a parking issue. We also have, people who come and can't find our location. We're not in the most accessible location. Even when you get in the building, it's a maze, right? People are always lost. I have to go find them. They're all over the place. And so,
Amen.
yeah, right. So he and I are going to meet next week and talk about that, and hopefully, come up with some, ideas on what we can do, if not immediately, because we are on a lease, but maybe in the near future. That would be helpful. And our July and October meetings will be held in the community. We are right now looking for locations. The one in October, we probably can't book because they don't want to hold space for that long. But the one in July, I think if we can start sometime, we'll start probably tomorrow trying to get that location. More than likely, it'll be in North Nashville for that one. And then the October one will be, I want to do it in the South Nashville area. So that's what the plan is, but we'll see who has the capacity to hold their meeting with us. And as we continue today on WPLN, when we talked about, talk to the family members of those who have been shot and killed, I think it's important to just drive home that we need survivor resources for those families. We need to be able to offer that through our agency and connect them with the kind of services that they need. And it will take funding to do that. It will also take the social worker position to start that process. And so I will say that I have, hold on one thing. I also included in my package to you all a policy called bias-free policing. I will tell you that came from Mr. Mark Wynn. He sent that because he thought when we had that conversation last month in the meeting and we made a recommendation for bias training, he said this policy might be very helpful to start a conversation with MMPD. This policy was written by the International Association of Chiefs of Police, but it could be like a blueprint since they don't actually have a standalone policy regarding bias in policing. And that concludes my report. I'll take any questions.
Thank you, Director Richard. Are there any comments or questions on the Executive Director's report? Ms. Spencer, then Mr. Milner.
Thank you for your report, Director. I just had a question around the budget, and more so specifically, if from the different meetings that have been had and different conversations that have been had, and forgive me if I am not aware of this, but has the mayor's office given any reasoning behind only the 2 investigators, only 4 out of the 9 positions being funded?
No, we haven't heard from them. They just sent that out to each department, like what they were going to include. It didn't really have any explanation on why they chose those positions, why they prioritized those over others. I didn't have any information regarding that.
Okay. And if I may, I'm unsure if this is fair for me to do. I would like to make a motion, but just after.
Okay, I'll say go ahead with your motion.
Okay.
Go ahead with your motion.
I would like to move that we formally request the mayor's office to give us a detailed explanation behind why they decided not to fully fund the budget that was proposed and that the board has approved. And so if we could have a letter basically and just have that kind of understanding, because I, for one, would definitely like to understand. I think the reasoning behind all these positions is very clear. And so I, for one, would like to hear the logic behind why it's not being fully funded.
Is there a second?
Second.
It's been properly moved and seconded that that we communicate with the mayor and ask for a reason why only the 4 positions versus the 9. Is there any discussion? Dr. Hilder.
Thank you. I am in favor of always understanding the mechanics. And I think that I have said several times in this forum that budgeting is a slow dance, that good budgets sometimes build over years, and I know that they're built on negotiations, and sometimes the paradox is, even with transparency with everybody, there's sometimes when you want to give people a little room to finish negotiating. So what I would like to ask before I make a decision how to vote on this excellent motion is, Director Fitchett, do you feel that there is positive momentum in your overall negotiation for this budget, or are you feeling like you want a little more muscle from the board at this time?
I think after the meeting that we went to on the 14th, and explaining it to the chair of the committee, the budget committee, that is Councilmember Berkeley Allen, she said a couple things, and you can help with that, Mr. Hayes. But she said that they were taking it into consideration, in looking at it, and she said I really outlined it specifically so that she got a real clear understanding on why we needed the positions. I do feel like we have an opportunity. I do feel like I think there's opportunity if they want to talk more about it on Saturday, but I didn't feel like it was shut down and the conversation was over. So I don't know, Mr. Hayes.
And I agree, and also Council Lady Allen was very complimentary of the proposal that was put forward. She was saying that was one of the best that she had received as far as the information, the detail, and everything. And I thought the council members that were there, I thought they were very open to try to help with this situation. But there were no promises. They said we'll have to see. So that was the gist. So yes, I'm optimistic. I'll say that I am optimistic. Okay, I didn't see. I should have looked around. Ms. McCree.
My question was, Maxine, maybe this would go to you. Chair, maybe this would go to you. I'm going to just say it and we'll figure it out as it comes out. So if we are to do a letter, the focus is to get that transparency on what their logic was behind the letter. How will we go about doing so? Is this a chair's letter? Is this a letter from the executive director? Like, what would that look like in your opinion?
In my opinion, I envision this more so as a letter that is written and signed first by the chair, but then signed by all of the members of the board that agree to it. And if I may make some remarks as well. Okay, thank you. I think as it pertains to, really as it pertains to the entire motion, I think the idea behind it is really truly just around understanding the position. Mm-hmm. Because I think around, there's a lot of talk around equity, around what is impactful work. And I think that because our work is so important and so impactful, I just for one want to just fully understand the position of the mayor's office. And so because to me, it does feel a little confusing to only see less than half of what's been asked kind of being understood. And thank you. I really do appreciate your comments because it is a slower process. Mm-hmm. And I just find myself wondering what is the reasoning behind it?
Mm-hmm. Okay. Mr. Milliner.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm a little taken aback because I thought it was a done deal, but what I'm hearing is not a done deal.
Not done.
Okay. What's the drop dead date? When will it be a done deal? As far
I think it's mid-June.
Mid-June.
Right, mid-June.
So
They're having budget talks now.
So we still have an opportunity.
We do.
We still have an opportunity. That's correct.
And the process is the mayor presents the budget, and then the council can revise the budget, and that's the stage that we're at
right now.
Is the council has an opportunity to revise.
And
They so choose.
Thank you. So my second was primarily for the purpose of discussion, because I think that that Director Spencer, brings up like the impetus, if you will, of what I'd like to at least weigh in on, and that is, to make sure that the mayor and others who are involved in this process understand that, particularly when it comes to the legal assistant and other positions, that it hampers the ability of this board to conduct ourselves in such a fashion that exercises the will of the people. And certainly as we move, and I think we're up to about 43, 46 open investigations now, and it just continues to rise and rise and rise. Not acknowledging those critical positions that are going to allow us to exercise the will of the people and to make sure that their complaints are expeditiously processed, I think that does deserve at some point some kind of understanding of what the logic is. So I guess rather than signing on to the idea, with all due respect, Director Spencer, of writing the letter, I think it's more of a statement right now that I'd like to make to the mayor and to those who are involved in the budget process to please to consider what impact these very important positions and that filling them are going to have on our ability to process the complaints of the people. Okay, and I'll just leave it at that. That's one of the things that I had on my list of questions, and I'll leave it.
Okay, I think, were you first? Okay, Dr. Hildreth, and then Mr. Whistle.
Thank you. So quick point of clarification. The power is in the hand of the council right now, right? The council's the decider. And the council still has a decision to make. And there's something happening on Saturday. Is that a public meeting?
It is. It's going to be on a Zoom. I can post it on my page, and I think it's on Councilmember Suarez, her socials is too.
Do members of this board have the ability to attend the meeting? I understand we may not be able to speak, but do we have the ability to attend the meeting?
I don't think it's an in-person meeting. It's a Zoom meeting.
Okay, but we have the ability to log on.
And to look at it on Facebook Live.
Okay.
Yeah.
And we also have hot mics in this publicly noticed meeting today. That is not over.
Right.
Right? Okay, I just wanted to make sure, because I did have a question after the motion. I was going to have a question to the director about your report about the legal assistant position, and I still may make those remarks at that time, which will be on the record, but these clarifications help me. Thank you.
And I did want to just say for clarification, because I've dealt with quite a bit of budgets in the past, and what the logic I think is that, we have 15 positions now budgeted. No, we have 15 budgeted now, and they felt that they added 4. That was progress enough, but we have explained that we've been in a deficit for so long that's some of the logic of why we need these. It's not a typical budget that you just say, okay, we're just going to increase it by this amount. So I just wanted to explain that too. Okay, Ms. Spencer, and then Mr. Holloway.
Well, first of all, thank you for making me a director.
And you notice I didn't correct him on that. I just let it go. I did hear it.
No, I think an additional remark that I would like to make on the motion is that, correct me if I'm wrong, but by the time that we have our next meeting, the budget will already have been set. And so if we are to make any kind of moves to, not even just around trying to publicly make a public urging or request of those that have that kind of power, but even just any kind of statements, it seems like by our process, this is the moment to make them. And so if we don't do it now, then when do we do it? And really, I think really, my first and foremost interest is truly in just the logic of it all, because it just does not fully make sense to me, and I'm genuinely confused and just want that kind of explanation. That's what I truly want. But then also I'm thinking from that kind of explanation, how does that then really enrich the conversation that they're making around the budget? And then also, I mean, just even from the conversation the spirited conversation that we're having now, it feels like perhaps this is that kind of moment to really also just like ask for that transparency. And I think there's a way that we can do that really still respects the process, but then also answers different questions that maybe other board members have, that maybe, anyone in the community might have.
Mr. Holloway?
This is kind of like a give and take situation. And like you said, the council will be the one to approve the mayor budget. And then also vote it down. So what we're going to have to do within the next day or so is get the ears of the council, send a letter to the council where all the council members receiving and let them know what you need, and they need to support us so we can do our job efficiently and go forward from there. But you definitely need to pick out a council that's going to definitely spearhead that for you.
Mr. Whistle?
So I had this comment before the motion, so I'm hoping it's okay to even say it right now. But
it's discussion. It's discussion period. So.
Okay, so kind of what I was thinking about is there like any type of way that we want to engage the public to support us in this effort and what that looks like, because again, it was the people of the city that made sure this board was created, and I think they need to be informed that this is where we are in the process and what they can do to help us get to the next step. So just wanted to just put that out there, how we can engage the public in supporting, because they can write to council members, etc.
Mr. Abdullah?
I'm sorry. Yeah, I was going to say the same. I think that it's important before we get to, well, I'll say it like this. It would be a good idea, like Ms. Whistle was saying, that if we were to engage the public to talk to council members. And I think that we can do that. It wouldn't take a long time to be able to talk to the public or talk to people the people that put us here. There are quite a few organizations, and we just looked at a list of those organizations, that if we got a letter out to them and having them to urge the council along with ourselves, I think that it would be far more effective than just to make us making a few calls. I'm thinking put it out to everybody to make those calls, and it would be more effective.
Okay. All right. It's been properly moved and second that we send a letter to the mayor for an explanation about why the 4 positions versus the 9. All in favor, say aye. No, I'm sorry. Any further discussion?
Well, I think you had.
I have a question or like a point of clarification surrounding when the budget does pass, if it passes as it is it specific to position, or do we get the funding in like a lump sum where you can kind of reallocate it to the necessary positions? Because as I understand it, again, which is why I'm asking for clarification, there are 2 positions which are supervisor positions, but the positions is the opposite. We have the 2 worker positions.
No, we have 2 investigator positions, 1 supervisory role position, which is the administrative service manager, and then another position which is under the research team. It's a professional specialist. It's not a supervisory role. It is a role that they approved because of the license plate readers, the legislation that passed on council, and so that is the role that would be the person. If we can get a person who has that skill set, it's more like a technical role within the research department, but it is not a supervisory role.
Got you. Okay, so that helps me think through this. Is there an opportunity to reallocate based on the priorities of the office? once it's
Yeah, I
passed?
think that, there is the possibility of that. It would have to go through the Human Resources and the Commission on certain positions to be able to reallocate funds for positions. They have to be approved by the what is it, the Civil Service, the Civil Service Commission. I will say to you that as I was working on this and picking the positions, we were doing that very thoughtfully on how to expand this organization. I've been without an executive assistant since I started. I haven't had anyone that would be what you would consider an executive assistant to the director. So I've been doing all this work on my own. Not that I can't handle it, but as the role grows, I think I'm going to need some assistance. And then when I think about the role of the social worker, and you'll hear today as we go over one of our cases today, one of the complaints, you will see why the benefit of a social worker, where this complainant would have been very helpful for that complainant if we had the social work position already funded and in operation. And then some of the other positions, just like I said, in order for us to build upon the work that we're doing, we can't just think that we can have all the investigations and complaints come in, but what are we going to be able to do with those? So I just wanted to put that out there, that whoever's listening to know that every position in our office it wasn't just, we're going to fill up with positions. Each one has a very critical role in the work that we're doing.
Okay, so we're back to, it's been properly moved and second that we write a communication to the mayor for an explanation about why the 4 positions versus the 9. All in favor of the motion, say aye. Aye. Oppose? Okay, the motion passes. All right. Okay, next. Any other questions for the director? Mr. Milliner.
Yes.
Ms. Spencer.
Thank you. Director Pitcher, on the JIS issue, would moving to that platform allow for secure remote access now to investigative files?
Yeah, we're working on that. I think that we would be able to do that I think so. I talked about that. We also, with the civil case management system, there is an app that you can use and go into the cases and look. So I think that we would have the capacity to do that we're not able to do that now through Metro ITS. So, yeah.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other questions? Okay, yes, Ms. Spencer.
I had something else. Sorry. I had something else. I wasn't sure because I think Dr. Hildreth, did you still have a question?
I have a question for the director.
Oh, okay. So I actually, because of the conversation that we've had, I want to bring up another motion for discussion because I really did appreciate the conversation we had around the council and also around the community engagement around this. So I was thinking, trying to synthesize everything, if perhaps we could, I don't know, maybe invite members of the council to something to where we have this more of an explicit conversation around what we need to be able to fully function. Or perhaps maybe it's an additional piece of communication saying with basically what the director has kind of laid out to us as a body, saying that we as the board members would like to ask, as you consider the budget for next year, to consider these X, Y, and Z, and that be something that perhaps not to go ahead and put in the work, but our new community liaison can be in the community and ask and gather input around, as well as trying to talk to the organizations that we've already have on our list before. And so that's it's still a little bit vague, but I do welcome any assistance in helping clean up that motion.
Okay, and I do want to say that typically with the budget, there are hearings with the council. Different departments, they go before the council, and it's just because our budget is a penny of what MMPD's budget is. So that's not a lot of money comparatively. So, but I do appreciate Council Lady Suara and Mendez and Allen, for actually even having, a space for us to actually make our case, and that's what that meeting is about on Saturday. Mr. Hood, you?
And I think I heard this question kind of come up in a few of the board members' questions, responses, asking for clarity. So I did want to point out, the letter, of course, stands alone and has its impact, but each board member, although the chair and the executive director are officially the spokespeople for the organization, there's nothing prohibiting each board member from being a person, from being an activist, from being a member of the organizations that you are obviously, and a participating voter. So all of you have made already budget motions and approved the budget that has been put forward by the director, and each of you can advocate for that budget on your own without a formal motion, without going through, I guess, the traditional spokespeople of the organization. So I did want to just point that out, because I think I heard that sort of get touched upon. I think people were probably remembering in our rules that the executive director and the chair are the spokespeople and the other board members are not, but that does not prevent you all from being members of the organizations that each of you are a member of, and again, Nashville, Davidson County voters who have your own council people, and you can directly appeal to them in advocacy of resolutions that this board has already passed. It would be a little weird if you moved or tried to recommend things that the board didn't recommend or pass, or in contradiction to that, but there's nothing prohibiting you from doing that.
Dr. Hilder.
Thank you. So I think we're on Member Spencer's kind of sort of motion, but we didn't have a second yet. But I was going to ask a question about the report, and I'm almost wondering if what I'm going to ask and then say might position either a crystallization of your motion or can I go forward? Thank you. Okay. Thank you. Director Fitchard, what do you think would be the impact on what looks like an 18-month lag time now from complaint to PRR? We're taking up one today that's 18 months old. What tangible results would our community, the folks who voted us in, the taxpayers who pay for this, what do you think would be the yield if we were able to get that legal assistant position? Can you describe that in a way like you're convincing counsel? And one of the reasons I want you to be particular is because I'm sort of asking you to write the script for the call to action for everybody, whether they're members, persons who are watching this now, persons who I hope will pull up the YouTube and watch it and watch parties together in your communities of care and concern in preparation for Saturday, in preparation for advocacy with the council. How will that make a difference if you can get that one additional position?
Well, when I think about these positions, when I think about complainants, for instance, with the case that we have today, when a person calls in and they're in anguish and they've experienced some type of harm, and they are looking for results from us. And so we take their complaints, we give it to an investigator, we go through that process, and then we begin to ask for records. We know that in the past, those records were held up. It was an impact on us. And so I think that having a legal assistant, because if we've got 10 complaints today, and even if we got 10 complaints this month, and even if the investigative staff were able to produce those in their turnaround time, 30 days or 45 days, and they all went to the legal advisor for review, there's only one legal advisor reviewing those. I've been assisting.
Right.
And so what happens, there's two things. The person who has filed the complaint is still reeling from the harm that they have experienced because they don't get any closure. It's already a long process.
Right.
45 days is a long time. And then you have to wait even longer, just like we'll see today. And then when you hear from the complainant about the impact that it has had for this thing taking a year or 18 months or even 12 months or even 6 months. 6 months is a long time.
Right.
And then if you compare that to how MMPD, their OPA division, has 10 investigators, they have multiple people relying and doing that work, and they can get theirs turned around within a 45-day time frame. It just, I don't see how we could not get a legal assistant to do this work. Because if we don't get the legal assistant, the social worker positions, and a few of the others, we will continue to be in really a circle of backlog, and we won't be able to get out of it.
So I'm hearing a picture, like we're a 4-lane road right now, but with these 2 new investigator positions, we're going to widen to a 6-lane road. So all that new traffic is going to come, and then it's still going to come to that 1-lane bridge. That's Attorney Yoon and sometimes you. Is that right?
That's correct.
So we can put more behind, but if we don't get this legal assistant position, we don't lessen the pain. We don't shorten the time. And as we have noticed on other PRRs, we don't shorten the time of uncertainty for those officers.
That's correct.
Whose future and profession are hanging in the balance.
That's true.
So everybody is held up. Citizens, law enforcement, everybody. We widen the highway, but we got to widen the bridge. And the bridge is the legal bridge. And not everybody can do legal stuff. Ask me how I know, right? Okay. Do we have a picture? Do we have a game plan? Would it be helpful for us to speak to everybody who has influence over those council persons who will be voting on this and making some decisions about increasing at least the legal position? Would that work?
Yeah, I think that would be helpful.
So can we, I'm going to do it right now because it's going to be on the tape. Can we all agree to ask everybody to watch this tape or to figure out and cue up the best bits of it? You can cut me out. Somebody says it's better. But basically, is that a way that we get to our communities of care and concern so that their voices can be lifted and action can go forward? Can we do this? Because we have the tools right here.
Yeah.
And we got the mic and the meeting's not over. Okay, if we can do that, then I'm feeling good about the way forward, as long as we, and that includes the people who are watching this, follow through. So thank you for that. Thank you for helping paint the picture so we can see what this really means. Thank you.
I just do want to comment, though, it's more than a legal assistant also. There are some other key positions, and one of them we talked about was the social worker. And then also, you heard it said that Director Fisher, that she's doing the work of some of the people that are missing rather than being able to manage. And then also, that organization has an awful lot of technical people. You know, you got the researchers and then you got the investigators and stuff, but the concept is that you needed a management person to manage that, so all of that management doesn't just fall on the executive director. I mean, we constantly hear about all of the meetings that she's going to, and she's on this committee and that. One person can only do so much of that. So I'm just saying, I do understand the bottleneck, but there are other bottlenecks also. I just wanted to make that point. Okay, Mr. Abdullah.
And I'll just be honest, I really feel like the majority of the people that elected to have this council have no idea what's happening right now. Have no idea. And, you know, just listening to Director Fisher, when you have a person come and they complain, and you take that complaint, and like she said, it takes 7 months. That's almost as if nothing really happened in that case. And the one thing that I'm afraid of is that the community began to have a negative look on the board because they feel as if nothing is happening in due time.
Yes.
So I agree that this is, I agree with Dr. Hilger, I'm sorry. That this is the time. We really should, to me, this is an emergency. This is an emergency, and we need to immediately get this film out for those that are listening, for the council members that are listening. This is something that needs to be done immediately. So that's all I wanted to say on that. I just want to make sure that the general public is not disenfranchised by what's happening.
Mr. Milner.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I know that when we took up the budget, we took it up very seriously. We looked at each and every one of those positions as being valid and being necessary. As you so eloquently stated, it has a ripple effect when one is not budgeted. We have an overall plan to deliver on what the people expect us to deliver. I just want to mention one systemic thing, and that has to do somewhat with the PRR we're going to see tonight. As mentioned, the MNPD has a cadre of investigators in OPA. If you play out a certain scenario, call me paranoid if you want to, where justice is delayed, which a man greater than me said justice is denied, okay, then those 10 investigators can basically usurp the power of this board and render it moot by just doing their jobs, okay, by getting out in front of any issue that we might address and rendering it sometimes at a less severe type of resolution than what we can come up with. And for those who've been following these meetings in the public, you know that cuts us out of any further action being taken against the officer who is being complained about. So in essence, when the OPA gets to the investigation before we do, then it stops us from imposing what we think is the righteous resolution. So I'm speaking to the city council right now and just saying, and imploring them to understand how significant each and every one of these positions are and getting us up to a more efficient and effective type of resolution that will, again, serve the intent of the people when it comes to an ample and efficient resolution of a complaint. Because once again, justice delayed is justice denied. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Ms. Spencer.
I think after hearing everything that everyone said, and especially I really appreciate your line of questioning, and I think you did push. If I was hearing you right, it was going one way or the other, and I think you did push me one way from what has been said here today. Really, from what I've also heard, it feels like that there's a big question around our legitimacy as an organization. If we are not able to actually follow through and show the public that we can actually exercise some kind of power, exercise that, actually do what we have said that we're here to do, that the organization is here to do, and that's to help provide justice and provide that kind of community voice. And so really, I think at this point, this has really pushed me to more so kind of ask, and I don't even know if I can fully make this a motion directly, but what my ask is if Director Fitchard, I know if you can more so kind of write out specifically how these roles could would affect the work as kind of more so as in a way that you've just kind of done so. And if that could be in writing, and if you're going to say that publicly in any hearing or anything, but I think as it pertains to this body, that be in writing, and then that be something that we all sign on to, and that could be something that's presented to the council as well, however people see fit. But I think from what we have heard, And from when our next meeting would be, we would have no other, we have no other time frame. And I think that would be of the utmost importance to do that, because I think that those words, and from how you've laid it out logically, and that's not even all the positions that we talked about, but from how we've laid it out logically, it makes so much sense. And for me, it really puts it that, like, you're right, this is an emergency. And really, especially like considering the legitimacy of us as an organization, I would like to, if it's a possible motion, I would like to move that the roles and the importance of the roles be written out, and that we can all sign on to that, and that be sent to the council members as and a matter is gently saying, we would like to gently encourage the council to keep this in mind. And these are the director's words.
Okay, and I do want to speak to that some. I don't know if it's in the summary form that you may want, but that's what I was saying, that they had really complimented Director Pritchard on how well that package was, and that was sent to, was it a budget committee? I'll let you explain.
It was sent to, yes, it was sent to Chairperson Berkeley Allen, who is the chair of the Budget Committee. I don't know if you saw the questionnaire. I can show it to you if you want it to look similar to this. I think they've already kind of received something.
And I wasn't sure.
Pass that down.
Excuse me, Director. I wasn't sure if did the full board get that, or was that the executive committee? That's what because I know.
No, I sent it to the full board.
Okay.
Yeah. And
Mr. Milner.
Second page.
Yeah, and Mr. Chairman, I was going to suggest to Member Spencer that maybe what we do is take the amended preliminary question that was presented, because it does really address all of those, I think, most of the issues, and maybe just create a signature page for that, because I thought as I read through it that it was it addressed the issues of what the impact would be of not filling these positions very well. Okay, and so maybe I'll just add a friendly kind of suggestion, suggest that we take this document or some form of it, Mr. Chair, and then, apply the signatures and forward it to the council. I think that's a great idea.
And I do want to add my understanding from the meeting that we had Saturday. I thought I understood, Chair Lady Allen, that the council was reviewing that information. I thought the council already had that.
She gave it to her.
But having it with a signature, I think that would be one way to go, as you suggested. Dr. Hildred, or was it Spencer? Okay. Okay, I got to look over this way better. Okay.
And then it just went out of my head. I'm sorry.
Can I recognize Mr. Whistle?
Yes, please.
Mr. Whistle.
I just want to encourage with the, I think sending letters and all that is great. And in addition to, it's just so much powerful to hearing the words, like when Dr. Hildred illustrated for us, the bridge illustration was so powerful. So like the budget meetings that are coming up, anyone who is on the board, anyone who's out in the community who believes in what we're pushing for, can go to those meetings and sign up for the public comment and advocate for those for those positions for us to get the funding for those positions, because I just think there's so much power in hearing words and people's stories and what you can get in the 2 minutes I think that they give you per person. But that's just something I wanted to publicly encourage us as citizens to do individually, even if it's not a full board thing.
Okay, back to Dr. Hildreth, if you're ready, and then Ms. McCree.
It was just a technical question. Is that summary public already? Is it posted on our website in a way that's easy to click to?
The question, well, there's nothing easy.
Perennial gripe.
There's nothing easy to click on for the Metro website, but I will make it public. I can do that today.
That's what I wanted to say, because even more powerful than our signatures, if we all can go to I I will post this, my pinned tweet, the link to this, the minute I know it's available. So whatever signal boosting we can do through the public venues that are available, that's something we can commit to. Thank you. That's it.
Ms. McCree.
I am so excited that we have the community liaison position finally filled. Is this outside of the range of something that could possibly creating like a campaign, or again, like something in writing, like a template that we as board members could share with community members? Is that something outside of the range of what the role of a community liaison would do?
It's not outside of the range, no. I think it's something that we can work on and try to get that done quickly so that it would encourage council. I don't necessarily, we'll have to figure out how to frame it out, but I think just like when, I don't think that it's something, it's not strange. I think that we can do that. It's not that difficult to do, but we'll get it. That's a good idea, so thank you.
Of course.
No, go ahead.
I was just thinking through, I remember when council was about to vote on license plate readers, and we did not necessarily have the role or direct influence on the community response to that, but there was about 15 community organizations that got together, put their name on a letter and said, hey, this is not something we want, after the Community Oversight Board took a stance on that issue. And if we now have the capacity, hopefully have the capacity to be on the forefront of that, craft the message so that we can get it to community members and organizations to sign on, I think that will move a lot quicker, and the message will be succinct if we are able to do it that way.
Yeah, I was thinking about the people's budget last year and how they were crafting their messaging. That's what was popping when I was trying to process it when you said it. Yes, I think that we can do that.
And I do just want to mention that one of the positions that we're trying to get is a media person.
Yes.
And that's what that person would be doing.
We definitely need that person.
So that's why we need that person.
And we interviewed people that had that skill.
Yes.
I mean, yeah, we were, yes.
Okay, Mr. Abdullah.
I'll be quick. I know we're talking about a lot of having things in writing, but would it also be possible to actually craft a video for because a lot of people may not go to a website and read over everything. Is it possible to craft a video to give to those organizations as well as send out from the COB?
I don't know if I don't think that we can craft a video. What we can do is take snippets of what is happening at this budget meeting and put those on social media. Okay. And we can have multiples on where we're having this really robust discussion.
And that's because if I'm not mistaken, Dr. Hill just mentioned something of that effect where we have, I'm thinking
we can actually pull from these conversations and put the real actual snippets of the conversation. And of course, she's talking about linking people to the whole, to this entire meeting. And I'm talking about pulling out and extracting from this meeting this conversation on the budget and having multiples on social media.
I think that would be really effective.
And I do want to just remind the board that we're just a time check. It's like 6:36 now, so we do have quite a bit on the agenda. But I just want to, this is very important. Ms. Spencer.
I kind of want to just do a little bit of clarification because from how I was, because I did look over this as well, and how I was thinking about it and making the motion was more so kind of in the narrative kind of form, as Director Fisher was talking about it. Because I think the narrative form, I just even for myself, sitting here, knowing this information, but then hearing you talk about it and making it feel real. And if that can still, again, not the written word can only do so much, but at least having that, being able to read that and feel that, I thought was particularly powerful. And that's kind of where the motion comes from, if that's a bit of a stronger clarification. I do really appreciate the friendly suggestions around it, but that's more so kind of where I was thinking with the motion. And I also just want to say, I really do love where we're coming to when we're thinking about how we as a body, as a board, are engaging with the budget. And I think, even no matter what we decide on tonight, as it pertains to next year's budget, thinking about where from all the things that we've discussed, we could have some major campaigns. And if there's things that we ultimately don't get this year, we could have such a strong public campaign with how we've been talking just tonight. And I just really love that. I want to make that remark.
Okay, now there was a lot of discussion. I'm trying to see if there's a motion out there somewhere.
Attorney Yoon can help.
I apologize. It wasn't going to be related to that motion, but in relation to your time check, it was 5:30 to 7. I know there's a witness complainant that showed up to, I guess, be heard. So noticing that there's no expert witnesses for the policy advisory report that's next on the agenda. But for the proposed resolution report, the one that we have, there is a complainant witness who wants to speak. Wondering if the chair could exercise the discretion to move those two items 8 and 9 up, and then have the policy advisory report.
So you're saying the public comment?
Well, first the proposed resolution report, and then the public comment where they do have the option of speaking if they want.
Okay, if we need to. Yeah, we can do that. Okay, so there's no motion? So,
well, Chair, you have the discretion to do so. Since it's already a noticed agenda item, the chair does have the discretion to move those items around for good cause.
No, I was saying we were still on the director's report, and I was saying there's no, we were having a discussion, and I wasn't sure if there was a motion there. Before I actually even got to that one.
Oh, no, I'm still going to make a motion around that if the director could craft a narrative and then we all sign on it, and that be sent to council if the body is comfortable with that. But also, if there was more debate around that, I'm more than happy to put that after. As to say, suggest that be done after everything else. Because I know we're also a little strapped for time. And the public deserves to be heard, so.
Okay, is there a second? Okay. Okay, there's, yes.
What did we actually vote on? I thought that we did have a motion that
we voted to actually send a letter to the mayor.
To the mayor's office.
To the mayor's office. We did actually vote for that. I do like the idea of maybe the director, drafting something that we could probably send out to different organizations. I like that idea. I don't know what everyone else thinks about that. And that way, if anyone's in agreement with that by common consent, we could just say we could do that then or something. Common consent. Okay. Thank you. All right. So now as far as time, so we were saying going to the, changing the agenda to go to the PRR. Okay. Do we need a motion for that?
No, sir. You are allowed to do that.
We will change the agenda. We will go ahead and go to the PRR, and that is Director Fitchard, and you have the floor.
Thank you. We're going to be discussing MNCO MNCO CC 2021-003. It's an excessive use of force complaint received on February the 16th, 2021, regarding an incident involving an officer pointing a gun at the complainant on February the 3rd, 2021. On February the 3rd, 2021, the complainant received a phone call from her granddaughter who reported being in an accident involving multiple vehicles on the highway. The complainant drove to pick up her granddaughter, and upon approaching the scene where multiple Tennessee Department of Transportation and Metro police cars were present, the complainant veered to the right shoulder of the road to the right of a TDOT vehicle with its lights activated. She drove forward along the shoulder at approximately 5 miles per hour. A TDOT and Metro officer were standing in the shoulder of the road. They both noticed a complainant driving up the shoulder at a low rate of speed. The TDOT employee and the Metro officer put out their hands to indicate to the complainant that she should stop. The complainant, when interviewed, stated that a glare was coming in from the back window and reflecting off of the rearview mirror into her eyes, making it difficult for her to see. After a couple of seconds where the complainant did not stop advancing at the low rate of speed, the TDOT employee remained stationary while the Metro officer advanced forward, repeating the word stop several times, then ultimately unholstering his pistol and pointing it in the direction of the complainant's head. The complainant stated that she didn't hear the officer saying stop initially, but when she did, it was about the same time that she saw him standing in front of her about 10 feet away with his gun pointed towards her head. The complainant reports asking him, "Why do you have a gun pointed at me?" And the officer responded, "I don't know. You could have run me down or something." After reviewing the body camera footage and interviewing the complainant, officer, and the two other witnesses, I find by the preponderance of the evidence that the violation for the use of force policy is sustained. Violation of the use of force policy is grounds for disciplinary action up to a Category A offense. A Category A offense is generally disciplined between 20 days suspension up to dismissal or demotion. The MMPD investigated this incident and initially recommended mediation between the complainant and the officer. The complainant declined the mediation, and the MMPD disciplined the officer for knowingly placing himself in jeopardy by not moving out of the way of the complainant's car. Knowingly placing oneself in jeopardy is a Category F offense, but the MMPD mitigated it to a Category E offense and gave him an oral reprimand. I do not find that the disciplinary action is appropriate. My recommendation is that the chief of police review this incident and find that the officer committed a Category A use of force violation and be disciplined with a 20-day suspension. When the investigator asked if the officer felt he had made a mistake, the officer responded, "Yes, ma'am, I did." But at the point where, as soon as I saw her, and I'm quoting, "As soon as I understood what was going on, I felt terrible. However, after thinking about it in hindsight and talking to multiple supervisors and other co-workers and stuff at the time, at the scene of what I saw and what I perceived when I drew my firearm, there was no, I drew it because I thought there was an active threat coming right towards me and the TDOT worker." The officer further stated during his interview with MNCO that a prior incident involving an MMPD officer being struck fatally by a vehicle in 2014 was on his mind. The complainant stated, "I'm 73 years old. I could have been sick or something could have happened. Why would you pull a gun on someone before you find out what's going on? I've tried to put my own spin on what would have made him do something like that. I just don't know what happened. If they let him stay on the force, he's a danger to just not people like me, but to anybody. Because if he does something this irate and outrageous, God knows what he's capable of doing to people without any justification." She also stated, "It took me 3 days to get out of bed. I've never been done that way in my entire life. I've never seen police do something like this." That concludes the reading of that. I did want to say that and you saw it, my recommended action, the police chief has already made a finding regarding this allegation and has categorized this matter, as we said, as a Category E, and has given the officer a written reprimand. According to the legal resource advisor, it is unlikely that any recommendation from the Community Oversight Board would be accepted by the chief of police as it relates to this incident, because of that email that they had sent on December 6, 2021, and the chief's subsequent responses to other recommendations for the COB. However, I believe a written reprimand, like I said, is inappropriate for this type of action and the impact that it has had on this particular complainant. And so, I believe that the written reprimand administered for this offense is insufficient discipline. I make 2 recommendations: that a copy of this final resolution report be placed in the officer's personnel file, and that the officer receive at a minimum a 20-day suspension for a Category A violation for excessive use of force. And that concludes my reading of that particular case.
Thank you. Are there any comments or questions on the resolution report? Resolution report number CC 2021-003. Mr. Goddard.
Yes, what were the factors and what's the reasoning to jump all the way to A, the highest possible violation?
I'm sorry, I didn't understand.
What were the factors and the reasoning for your decision to elevate this all the way to an A, if I've got the letters right? Category A?
Yeah, Category A. Because he violated the use of force policy by pointing a loaded weapon in the face of an unarmed person who was picking up the grandchild. Also, based on the policy, it says intentional misuse of the authority granted under the use of force policy is grounds for disciplinary action up to and including those outlined in Category A. The fact that he pulled the gun out and was moving towards her, pointing the weapon at the vehicle, not knowing who was in the vehicle and who was beyond the vehicle, I think, is why I decided to move that from a written reprimand to a Category A with suspension.
And where does the 20 days fit in the range of what's authorized for?
20 days is if you look at the ranges up there, the 20 days is the minimum for a Category A.
Up there. I apologize.
Right there, too.
Mr. Milner?
Mr. Chair,
Mr. Milner, okay, I need the microphone.
I'm sorry.
My microphone was off.
I would be remiss if I did not point out how this particular case relates back to our budget discussion. We're in the OPA, the Office of Professional Accountability, the internal affairs of MNPD, got out in front of our own ability and capacity to address this issue and came across with a less severe type of resolution. And as was stated in the report, and as we know now through the civil service laws, you can't discipline people multiple times for the same thing. So whoever gets there first, basically, is the one or the organization that rules the day. We need these positions filled. We need the legal assistance. We need that bridge widened, okay? Otherwise, if you play it out, this could be the result of every complaint brought by the citizens here in Nashville, Davidson County. It is a systemic issue and one that must be addressed.
And I think that you have to look at the fact that MNPD, we have a person pointing a weapon during the middle of traffic on a busy intersection, interstate. And the fact that OPA decided they wanted to mediate this case is just, it astonishes me. When you listen to the complainant, when she called and what she was experiencing, and then for them to want to mitigate it down to mediation it just doesn't make any sense to me. And so this was an incident, and if you watch the video, like myself and those who have watched the video, you will see that even the partner that was there thought it, just covered his face with his hands like, oh my God, what just happened? And Ben shook his head multiple times because it was an egregious act against a citizen, and it was uncalled for what was happening in that moment.
Mr. Abdullah.
In my opinion, 20 days is not even enough. 73 years old. 73 years old. And so when I think about that, that's the officer, he admitted a mistake. But that's the kind of mistake that if it had gone any further, she would be gone. Mm-hmm. And so, 20 days, if it was me, I would say demotion, but I know we have to go according to rules. But 20 days is just not, because, again, this is the public. We are here for this specific reason. And like he was just saying, mediation, getting out in front of it before anything happens, making sure that we don't have the investigators. All of this is all a part of the same stuff. And so what I would like to see is us vote and make sure that this 20-day suspension is put before the chief. Now, why do I say that? Because if something else happened, even if nothing happens from this, if something else happened, then it's on the chief. The community would know that would have been an action by the Community Oversight Board, and But if something else happened after that with this same officer, then we would be on record for trying to do something about it. So I think that we must do something about that. And 20 days, in my opinion, is just not even enough.
I do want to recognize myself. One thing we tried to stress over the months, the time that I've been with the Community Oversight Board is de-escalation. And it looked like there were some opportunities there for de-escalation. They talked about he could have got on the other side of the barrier, could have got behind the vehicle and everything. So, this really highlights that's an area, even though we've had some policy changes and de-escalation, it seems like we still have quite a bit of work to do in that area. So, but there were some options.
And I do want to point out that MMPD had the opportunity to deal with it as a use of force violation. They chose to just say that it was knowingly that it was that the officer placed himself in danger. Never thought about what it did to this complainant. That's a problem. I don't understand that. I don't understand the reasoning behind that. If they could have disciplined for something that the officer but it was only focused on him not getting himself out of the way, not what the impact was on this particular person.
Any further discussion? Dr. Hilden.
I move to accept but modify remains a Category A offense with the recommended action of demotion based on Member Abdullah's statement and in light of Member Milner's recognition of what this means. This is the kind of letter I feel compelled to send to the mayor and the chief. And this kind of letter, for this kind of egregious action, I will sign off on every time. Thank you.
I second that motion.
Okay. It's been properly moved and second that we approve board recommendation for the proposed resolution report CC 2021-003. Is there any focused discussion?
Well, if I'm not mistaken, was that with demotion or was that the same 20 days?
The motion was for 20 days and demotion, right? It was
for demotion in lieu of 20 days.
Okay, demotion in lieu of 20 days. Okay. All in favor of the motion, we'll go by a roll call vote, and we will start with Mr. Milner.
Aye.
Mr. Abdullah?
Aye.
Ms. Spencer?
Aye.
Dr. Hildreth?
Aye. Aye.
Aye for the chair. Mr. Whistle?
Aye.
Mr. Goddard?
Nay.
Ms. McCree?
Aye.
Judge Brown? Mr. Holloway? Okay, motion passes. MNC OCC 2021-003 passes. Thank you. All right, now we will go back to the proposed resolution report, and I am so sorry. Thank you. Now the public comment, because we need to vote on it first. Now the public comment on the PR.
It's a little late, but I'm going to say good afternoon to everybody. I'm not here to how would you say, to try to get this man fired or anything this way. It's just something that I had to deal with, and not just from not just from the standpoint of him doing what he did, because I was frozen in time, seemed like, when he did this. 4 days later, I think it was 3, I was hospitalized. I'm a heart patient. Now, like I told him, any common person, any police, I've dealt with the police force here in Nashville because I'm not original from here. I wasn't born and raised here. I want you to know that. I was born in the South. And all my days, like I told him, when I talked to him, I've never been treated that way in my entire life. And we had racial stuff happening all around me, but I didn't come from that part where I even saw anything like that. I don't know if this man had a problem with me being black. That's the only thing that I can see. And you could say, well, she's playing the race card, but no. Like I said, I've got and people may think this is funny, but my very best friend, I even have a judge I think of him as a brother. The point is, when he did me this way, he cost me not just time. He could have cost me my life. I got congestive heart failure. Take medicine for it every day. So I don't only want this man to be given demotion. I don't want him to even be fired. I just want you all to come up with a solution on paying me for this. Because, see, I didn't have to go through this here. And if you don't do it voluntarily, even if I lose, I'm going to sue you anyway. So this is what I wanted to bring out to all of them, because this is not right. I didn't do anything. He wasn't in no path, and he lied. He doubly lied. Said he was in a pass, and then he told his captain that he didn't point the gun at my head. I looked down the barrel of that man's gun. Just like he had his gun this close to me. He walked up on me 10 feet with it pointed and come on up to me. And then he gonna tell me, well, I didn't think you was, I didn't know you were just a sweet little old lady. I could have been a dead little old lady when he did this. This is unnecessary, uncalled for. Like I said, I don't try to go around saying this person is bad because he's white, or this person is bad because we got him on both sides. But let me tell you something. I won't let him get away with this way. And then he lied. If he'd have told the truth, and then I just asked, why? Give me a reason. Why you got your gun pointed at me? And I said, what did I do? Nothing. And we said my feet was on the brakes. And when I was coasting, not driving, coasting down there in the wrecker car, the thing to pick up my granddaughter's car, he was putting the car on it, and he was away from that police officer. That man walked from his two partners was standing up there. He walked from them over there just to make a show off. I don't think, and I'm going to even now put it as a racial thing. I think he wanted to show that he was a big and bad man, that he could do somebody that way. Now, that's all I got to say. I could go on, but y'all don't want to hear the whole story behind this here. And whatever they do, that's fine, because I'm going to do what I have to do if I have to just get somewhere and let the world know. Don't think these police, especially, and I thought he was a rookie. Even the person that was over him said, there's a protocol for to even pull your weapon that way. And that was no protocol because there was a wreck, a minor wreck at that. It wasn't bad. And I said, I could have understood it. I tried to reason this out in my head. If somebody had just robbed, and then they said I was in a sedan. I was in a Altima. That's what I was in. I wasn't in no sedan. And then one of the guys that I read, somebody sent the statement out. He lied too. He said, well, I saw him put it, but I didn't see him. He pointed at the pavement. Why do people find after they done something to lie? I bet if it had been me pointed one at him, I bet you one thing, I wouldn't be standing here talking to nobody tonight. And that's a fact. Thank you all.
Thank you, ma'am, for your comments. Thank you. Okay, Mr. Carter.
Just very briefly, I just want to respond to the issue that Member Milner raised about the timing. This came up well over a year ago for the first time, Mr. Milner, and I remember Judge Brown, I believe, raised it. Several of us chimed in. Recommendations were made by individual board members. It wasn't a formal resolution, I don't think, that communications be had with the police department and with Metro Legal, if need be, to see what their required timeline was, what our timeline was, how we could fit in, and see if there was a way to make make that work so that we did have the time to have our decisions before the chief, before he made the decision like happened in this case. I don't know what has happened on that. It may be that civil service rules require that it proceed more quickly, that we can catch up. If that's the case, the recommendation was that we prioritize the cases that are still within the time frame and try to get those to this board that are more serious cases so we can have that input before it is mooted. I don't know if anybody's prepared to respond to that today from the staff, and later in the meeting, probably better time for that anyway. But I did, a chunk of that was before you came on the board, so I didn't know how aware you were of that.
Thank you. Okay, now moving on to the agenda is the policy advisory report. I do want to thank Mr. Goddard for being the committee person to actually handle the hearing, and also Mr. Crowell Williamson. So now Mr. Crowell Williamson and also Mr. Goddard, if you need to, you're up. And I will say this one, we will have a vote on this also. This also requires a vote.
Good evening, Board. Thank you for your diligence this evening. It's been good to witness. I know I've presented this to you all before, so I'll try to be as brief as possible, but I do think it is out of fairness to those who are here tonight or who might watch this at a future point. I think it is fair to them to have a conversation on this so they know what the board is voting about. Next slide. So the genesis for this report was the fact that during a review of Chief Jake's responses to a recent resolution report issued by the board, staff members noted that there were differences in the investigative findings between the MNPD and those of the COB. I won't go into them. We've kind of already presented this, but comparing any two findings, there are substantive differences that could cause future concern when investigating complaints. Next slide. This is a conversation about administrative process language, which is something that the Department of Justice has identified as important. In reviewing the San Francisco Police Department as compared to their oversight body, the differences in their investigative outcomes were significant, and the DOJ flagged that as an issue because, and I'm quoting, although this is a subtle difference, administrative process language is important because there's legal precedence to how standards are applied, and different definitions can have significant impact on the process. Different categories for findings create challenges for ensuring accuracy and sufficiency of the disciplinary record, and these differences add to the challenge of identifying and addressing institutional issues, such as that of training or policy. This led us to consider several research questions. First, how do the COB's policies relative to MNPD's compare to other oversight bodies relative to their respective police departments? Second, is the discrepancy between the COB's investigative findings and MNPD's significant enough to warrant concern? And third, are there potential negative repercussions of failing to address this discrepancy? To address this, we compared the policies of several cities' peer oversight bodies to their police departments, specifically those of Atlanta, Cincinnati, Cleveland, San Francisco, and Seattle. We chose these cities because they had investigative oversight bodies comparable to the COB, and they have relative similarity to Nashville in terms of population size. Briefly, from a high level, the results showed that 4 of the 5 cities we studied had nearly identical or identical policies between their police and oversight bodies, with Atlanta being the one exception, and they had both significant differences in policies, and was the only one of these cities not recently under some form of federal agreement with the Department of Justice. This has been an issue for upwards of a decade for Atlanta. They outlined in their 2014 annual report that no other measure determines the public's perception of police accountability than the police department's response to citizen allegations of police misconduct. The disciplinary percentage of agreement on sustained complaints for many citizens is the most critical factor of how well law enforcement departments are attempting to hold their officers accountable. This percentage is also the citizens' measuring stick regarding the effectiveness of oversight body and the police department's respect for the agency's work. And as you can see in this graph, Atlanta has historically had a very low percentage of their sustained complaints accepted by the police department. They have a goal of 75%, and they've never really even approximated this, mostly existing in the 11 to 31% range, which is far below their goal. And this This presents a potential issue for us here in Nashville. Overall, MMPD has agreed with 66% of the findings that the board has issued, but this is driven by a high number of not sustained findings with which MMPD has agreed. When we only consider findings of sustained or deficiencies identified, MMPD has agreed with 6.2% of the board's findings. It is important to note that MNPD has not responded to very many sustained findings from the board at the time of writing, and so this is an early flag. This is not a concern yet, or it's not an issue yet, rather, but it is a concern. As I mentioned, Atlanta is the only city not under federal agreement with the DOJ and the only city without comparable findings to its police department. And while these federal investigations to which I refer never had coherence and investigative findings as the primary focus of their text, they did often make explicit that there should be coherence in the findings, investigative findings of oversight and police bodies. And I already hit this last bullet point, so I will skip that for now. So there are 4 recommendations. I'll read them once and then we'll have them on the screen so we all can see them. The first recommendation is that the COB and MNPD should meet and develop a shared set of definitions for investigative findings. They should work to develop such standards within 60 days of the issuance of this report. Second, the COB and MNPD should modify Section 9B of their MOU to require MNPD to operate under a presumption of correctness regarding the board's investigative findings. Third, the COB and MNPD should agree to modify Section 9B of the MOU to require MNPD meet a standard of preponderance of the evidence when it disagrees with the findings of the board. And fourth, the COB and MNPD should agree to modify Section 9B of the MOU to include language outlining that, absent preponderance of the evidence that the board's findings are in error, MNPD should implement the recommended discipline from the board. Just for reference, this is what our MOU currently reads. Upon receipt of a resolution report, the Chief of Police agrees to review and provide a written response thereto within 45 calendar days. Such response should include, but should not be limited to, acceptance, partial acceptance, or non-acceptance of the findings of the board and/or recommendations, a statement of reasons for the department's decision, and a description of actions taken by the department in response to the report, including any factual, legal, or policy issues affecting the department's decision-making processes. The impetus for a lot of these recommendations are drawn from Issue 24, which is a charter amendment that was approved by Cleveland voters in November 21. I'm not going to read this whole thing, but the highlights of their language is that the chief and executive head of the police have to presume correctness of their oversight board's fact findings and recommendations unless there's clear and convincing evidence that the findings of the board are erroneous. And without that proof, the chief must at least impose the minimum discipline the board has recommended. If the chief believes that clear and convincing evidence exists that the board's findings are erroneous, they have to notify the board in writing of any refusal or lesser alternative discipline to be imposed with the reasons and providing the board with clear and convincing evidence justifying that decision. I'll skip over this part as well, other than to say that Issue 24 was challenged in court by the city to see whether it stood up to the test of the consent decree, and the judge who's been overseeing the consent decree in the city the entire time said that it did not present any impediment to the city's consent decree with the DOJ. So they have begun moving forward with that board. And again, presumption of correctness, I will breeze through this side to say that the presumption of correctness is really a rule of law by which the findings of fact or ruling of law are presumed true, subject to the presentation of other findings that may rebut the presumption. It's a starting point, but it is a presumption that must be overcome. And generally it is overcome by some sort of evidentiary standard, like clear and convincing evidence or preponderance of the evidence. Really, I think that the question that is presented in front of us today is, do we, as a board, want to be in line with cutting-edge oversight work? There are going to be hurdles to get there, of course, but this is what the direction that oversight is heading, in my opinion, and we have to consider whether we want to follow. We have had a number of community meetings and feedback from a number of organizations, including Metro Legal, MMPD, the Nashville Bar Association, the Sycamore Institute, the American Muslim Advisory Council, NOAA, and the Cleveland Community Police Commission. Where the rubber sort of hits the road on this is the feedback that we have received from Metro Legal. I outlined what their feedback was at the time of the last board meeting, and I will outline that again. But we also received, just a couple hours before the board meeting, further feedback from Metro Legal, so I just wanted to reiterate what I said at last meeting and also provide further context from what they sent us. We go to the next slide, Marion. We have 4 recommendations as I presented them to you today. I and Attorney Yoon have kind of discussed what Metro Legal's response means to us in regards to these recommendations, and we believe that their concerns primarily hinge on our current recommendations 2 and 4. The first recommendation, that we should develop a shared set of definitions, they did not seem to have any issues with that. The third recommendation, that we meet a standard of preponderance of the evidence, they did not seem to have issues with that. Where they did seem to have issues was recommendations 2 and 4, as well as a previous recommendation that we have since struck, that previous recommendation being that we should strive to reach a 75% acceptance rate. That is now just incorporated into the discussion. It's not a recommendation. So current recommendations 2 and 4 are the ones that we need to carefully consider, in my opinion. Their previous concern with recommendation 2 was that by presuming correctness, this improperly delegates appointing authority and decisions in disciplinary matters to the COB and calls into question the impartiality of MNPD decisions in disciplinary cases. And their previous concern with recommendation 4 was that if MNPD had already issued a decision concerning discipline when the COB releases findings, they cannot revise their decision simply because the COB issued a different recommendation, because this would establish the due process outlined in the civil service rules, and that's a conversation we've been having already. Their more recent concern is about the division of authority over officer discipline between the COB and MNPD, and really the heart of their point is that the charter clearly outlines that MNPD has the authority to discipline. COB's authority is to recommend discipline, and thus their interpretation is that these recommendations are inconsistent with the charter, and that we therefore could not amend the MOU to reflect those changes. And I brought this to you before with sort of 3 paths that could be taken. Ballot initiative, discuss with council, discuss with council, or modification of civil service rules. And those still do stand, I believe, as options. And I think it is worth noting that there are different legal opinions on this. Metro Legal has made their opinion clear on these, and I think it stands to reason that Metro Legal's opinion on the second and fourth recommendation reflects the opinion of MNPD. I think that we can address one of the concerns, the board can address one of the concerns with recommendation 4, as I mentioned last time, very easily by adding language that indicates that if MNPD has already made a disciplinary decision on a particular allegation, the board's recommendations do not override that, and that the MNPD cannot enforce that. But the larger issue of their concern with our ability to enforce discipline remains, and I think that is the largest question that the board has to consider tonight. Process, we can just move on to the next slide. We've already had the first meeting where we've presented and explained the draft report, etc. That draft has not been withdrawn by the director before the board meeting, though it can be withdrawn at this meeting. We've solicited public comment and public forum. And I think the important things to note are that the board tonight may consider the report and the recommendations collectively or separately. You could vote individually on each recommendation. I'll point to an example of that being the soft empty hand report. Those of you who were here then may recall that that was originally a 3-recommendation report, with the 3rd recommendation being effectively an ordinance that we wanted council to consider, and we deferred that 3rd recommendation while choosing to adopt the first 2. So something similar could happen here tonight if the board were so inclined. And when this report is issued and voted on and approved, these proposed recommendations become COB recommendations and therefore reflect the position of the board. And this is just a pictorial representation of where we are in the process. The COB voted to affirmatively release draft for public comment at last board meeting. Tonight, we had our public hearing wherein the advisory report was the only agenda item, and now we are on to the board evaluating and voting whether to issue the revised report. And now it is to the board for discussion. I'm happy to be a resource. Any questions that any of you all may have, I'm happy to answer.
Before we get to the discussion, I'd like to ask Mr. Goddard if there was anything you wanted to add since you chaired the public hearing.
I've got things I want to say, but just a board member now, nothing more from the public hearing, I think.
Okay, then I'll go ahead and recognize you first then.
All right, thank you. I've got some concerns about this particular report and the process of reports in general, but I'll try to be brief. I won't be completely brief, but I'll try to be fairly brief. I want to state first and foremost, I am very, very interested in this board effecting positive change in police procedures. I want that to happen. I want that to happen efficiently, and I want it to happen on important issues. Being cutting edge in oversight, if that means within our legal framework where we're entitled to act, we do all we can, I'm all in favor of that. If it means straying beyond what we can legally ask of the chief and spending a lot of person hours working up reports and doing that, I'm less enthused about. We may need a charter amendment to do much of what you would like, and I'm not making a judgment on what you like. I'm just giving my opinion on this other. And if so, members of the board, others that want to start a petition drive and seek to have the charter amended to expand that's entirely appropriate. Consent decrees under a federal judge are a whole different ballgame. The idea that a judge found something like this legal in Cleveland under consent decree has no relevance to Metro's charter and the state law that says what we can do. My understanding is 2, 3, and 4 are toast in terms of legal enforceability, and Metro Legal will tell the police department that, and the police department will say no, and we will have accomplished not much going this route to get to that discussion. I think having a discussion with the police and with civil service as need be and understanding how they view that and working through that process, not in response to a 25-page report put in front of them, but early in the process to see what the legal issues are, to see what the practical issues are in their eyes. Not that we agree with them, but to understand what we're dealing with and working that through. And if we can, and if there's an avenue to have a discussion and an agreement, that's great. If it takes an advisory report after that, and that's what's necessary, that's fine. I will confess, I am a personal friend of Legal Director Wallace Dietz. I know from talking to him, he views this board as his client as well, not just MNPD. You may disagree with his legal opinion, but I don't think I know it's not because he just knee-jerk going to say what the police department wants to hear. I can't vote for 2, 3, and 4. I can vote for 1, I think, but 2, 3, and 4 I voted for. I do not think we have the legal authority to do that. But my greater concern is that if other folks think I'm wrong, if you reach out to the chief and work on something, say license plate readers that don't make progress with discussion first, advisory report second, I will acknowledge that. I've been wrong before. I don't like to talk about that, but it has happened. I really, really, to repeat, do want to have an effective and efficient process to engage and have positive change that we are comfortable with made with the police department. And I think that if we are able to do that, in that context, we have a much greater chance of that change being effected down to the rank and file as opposed to just words on a paper. I don't mean to say that's all this would be, but it would be closer to that. Thank you for your time. Sorry I took so long.
Judge Brown.
I think Mr. Goddard was reading my notes.
We've not talked outside of this meeting.
No, my notes that I was going to say.
Yeah, that's right. No.
But no, we have not talked outside. I concur. I can very readily support Resolution 1. I think that's something would be helpful, and it's accomplished. I have the same serious reservations about the next 3. I think there's serious legal problems with it. I also think that we're unfortunately be getting into a situation of combining what would be a full administrative hearing with witnesses and everything else, where the board finds, what the board finds is by preponderance of the evidence. The board is simply getting a well-written report by our executive director, but, it's not one where we have any opportunity to observe witnesses or anything else. And so to try to coat our findings with some invincibility type thing and then say the police department can only reverse it by probable cause, I just think it gets us into a quagmire that's going to take a lot of time and effort, and I think it's legally unenforceable. I mean, I could live with something like on the 4 that, should agree to modify Section 9B, that perhaps something like absent a well-reasoned explanation that the board's policy should be adopted, but we just get into a very sticky issue with trying to get into preponderance. So we find by preponderance 51% that X happened. The chief finds by 51% that it didn't happen. I mean, we're just getting into a quagmire on that, and I think we could make it explicit to have that the chief's explanation be well reasoned. But I think once we get over into probable cause and putting some sort of extra stamp on our findings as opposed to the chief's, I think it's a non-starter, and we've spent an awful lot of time on it. I'd rather see, frankly, the time spent on some of these reports, spent on getting these other reports out, because if we don't get our reports out, our recommendations become, in many cases, as the lady that spoke to us, they become academic. And so I can support one. I can't support the others.
Director Fitcher.
And so I wanted to read what Metro Legal sent to Attorney Yoon so that you guys understand exactly what Mr. Goddard's position and Mr. Brown's position is, so that you get a clear understanding. So what they wrote was, sorry for the late response. The concerns legal raised with the first draft of the report are still applicable to those proposed changes. We also want to raise an additional concern about the division of authority over officer discipline between the COB and MMPD. I think that's the important part. Like COB authority, MMPD authority is based on the charter, including the responsibility to impose officer discipline. See Section 8.203, the chief of police shall be responsible for the efficiency, discipline, and good conduct of the department. This is in contrast to the COB charter authority, which is to provide disciplinary recommendations to the chief of police. See Section 11.1302. These are clear delineations of non-delegable authority. Accordingly, it is inconsistent with the provisions of the charter to amend the MOU to reflect the proposed policy report changes. And so that is explaining what they're saying in regards, and that's just from the legal team with Metro Legal.
Okay. Just one quick question. So when did you get that information from Metro Legal?
1:30 today.
1:30 today. And this has been out there for quite a while. Just Just wanted to note that. Is that a hand, Ms. Spencer? Okay. Okay.
I had one
okay.
question.
Go ahead.
There were a large number of other agencies were asked for comment. I take it we did not get any comments from any of the other agencies other than Metro Legal?
None other than general support for the recommendations.
I'm sorry?
None other than general support for the recommendations.
From each of those agencies, or?
Correct, with the exception of MNPD and Metro Legal. Okay. The rest of those.
Yeah, I mean that they were just that general. There was no specifics.
We did get specific feedback from the Cleveland Community Police Commission, which is the organization that had a large hand in drafting the issue 24 in Cleveland, and they just had, I guess the answer is still yes. They generally gave support and did not provide specific feedback on how to change them.
Yeah, it would frankly have been helpful to have those comments, but thank you.
If I can recognize Mr. Holloway first, then Mr. Goddard.
It doesn't matter if you're a friend of mine or not. I want to do the right thing for the people who voted for this board. And if I can see something that can benefit the community and help the community to get legal advice and be treated fairly, that's fine. It don't matter whether you're my friend or not. He can still be my friend, whether decision I make or not.
Okay, Mr. Goddard.
Thank you. I've disagreed with Wally a lot. If I disagree, it won't be a problem. My understanding, Mr. Unum asked you to respond, is that we got that what was read earlier this afternoon recently, we had earlier had specific objections on these provisions from Metro Legal before the last meeting, I think. Is that correct?
I can't remember when we reached out to Metro Legal, but I'd have to refresh myself and look at it. But we did speak to them about an earlier draft. That draft got changed, incorporating some of Metro Legal's suggestions, and then we reached back out to them after the last meeting. I want to say the very next day to say, would you please look at the new draft and make any recommendations to that? So that was what we got today. Was
thank you
from our ongoing conversations.
Mr. Milner.
This is for the executive director. That very last statement. Can you read that again, please, where it speaks to policy changes?
Like COB authority, MMPD authority is based on the charter, including the responsibility to impose officer discipline. And it says, see section 8.203, in parentheses, the chief of police shall be responsible for the efficiency, discipline, and good conduct of the department. This is in contrast to the COB charter authority, which is to provide disciplinary recommendations to the chief of police. See section 11.1302. These are clear delineations of non-delegable authority. Accordingly, it is inconsistent with the provisions of the charter to amend the MOU to reflect the proposed policy report changes.
Does that include even recommendation 1?
I don't think so.
Thank you.
Would that be correct?
Just the first conversation we had with Metro Legal, they did a very helpful job of saying, recommendation 1, this is what we think. Recommendation 2, this is what we think.
Right.
This afternoon, I got this email, and it sort of just blanket says this. So I was unclear which of these recommendations that was referring to. My understanding, and I can clarify with them, is that they were speaking to recommendation 2 and 4. 4 pretty clearly, 2 probably, 3 I'm not sure, but 1 definitely not. So if that's helpful. 1 definitely not illegal or a charter problem. 2 possibly, according to Metro Legal. 3 I don't think so, but 4 definitely a problem for Metro Legal.
So the recommendation number 1, and when we talk about syntax, that is not a part of the charter. Is that correct? Because that's an awful broad brushstroke.
I'd have to double check, but I don't think we did anything about sustained, not sustained until we did the bylaws. In the charter, they didn't get to that level of specificity.
Thank you. I don't believe they did either. But Mr. Chair, just in general, I want to commend Mr. Crowell Williamson on what he's presented to us. I think that words do matter. I think that consistency does matter. I have to say that given given the legal response and our lack of being able to address or to really counteract anything that Metro Legal has said to this point, leaves me in a very similar position as two of my other colleagues in terms of the enforceability of it. And I do support recommendation number one for sure. The others I'm ambivalent about because I'm not sure if, in fact, we would have any lasting authority in that regard.
Dr. Hildred?
Thank you. I want to commend you on the depth, the detail, and breadth of the work that you presented before us. I take very seriously the sober and thoughtful positions articulated by each of my board members, especially those who are members of the legal profession and have a particular edge on the knife in dissecting this. And I respect that deeply. But I'm also driven to the actual language of the Metropolitan Charter Amendment 1 that created us. And you're going to have to bear with me because the text is teeny tiny. But somewhere up in here, under Section 11.1302, Power and Duties, the board shall have the following power and duties and shall by majority approve, adopt procedures for their implementation. 1, the board shall have the power to investigate allegations that MMPD officers have committed misconduct against members of the public, as well as issue policy advisory and resolution reports assessing allegations and misconduct of MMPD. I'll stop there. The amendments, ordinance authority. There's so many things we can't do. It also said we have subpoena power. We know that by preemption, that was clawed back. We know that the PRR, by practicality, that's been clawed back because we can't get there first with our structure right now. But one thing we can do is think clearly and carefully together in civic space. And I'm understanding that that's what policy contemplation is. How might we? What is possible? And what is practicable? What happens elsewhere? And it seems that the time, care, intellectual capital, and effort that this board does to do that work while their colleagues are investigating and getting stuck on that one-lane bridge that I don't think this part of the staff can actually help with. This is the one thing, and I will speak only for myself right now, that allows me to keep from feeling like I'm drowning here, that we're sweeping sand from the shore because it's futile. Because this work, this view nationally, to see what else is happening in policy according to the rule of law, reminds us that there are other biospheres. You know, it said that fish don't know they're wet. Well, sometimes I'm wondering if we here in this jurisdiction have the ability to know we can be free because of all the structures and systems that we have been grappling with and talking about and working through today. But sometimes we get to hear that there are other jurisdictions that can do other things, and we actually get to look at the math of our cases, and we can dream big. So before I close, I want to say that my vote and consideration may not come from my legal training about what I think is likely to happen, but it may come from my legal heroes on the Supreme Court who dared shout prophecy into the wind. And one of the examples I would like to leave us with is the Korematsu case of 1944. And maybe that resonates with me because I'm a child of the San Francisco East Bay. So Fred Korematsu and folks that look like him from his culture, they're my people too. And Fred Korematsu was convicted under violating a racially tinged executive order at the beginning of World War II, 1941. The case didn't come to the Supreme Court until 1944. By that time, it was very clear that Mr. Korematsu did not present a clear and present danger. But at the same time, the court found then that, well, the executive order, because, danger, and we need to do that. But there were 3 striking and strident and sharp dissents that echoed down through 74 years before they were finally heard in 2018, when the most egregious portions of the Korematsu decision that said that racial segregation and isolation was okay under certain circumstances. 74 years later, those 3 dissents kept echoing and echoing, and it was overturned in some Trump case. I'm going to close with my last hero, Justice Thurgood Marshall, who spent all of his time litigating to break these things open, gets on the Supreme Court, and ends his days on the court no longer being able to write for the majority. So he too, his voice and his pen was in dissent, but those words last and they live. Sometimes, even though we're drowning in these ponds, we have to still speak what's possible. And by under our authority, which gets smaller and smaller, we can still do policy work. And when we do the research and we have the ability to find out what other folks can do and be inspired in that, maybe no voice on this board will ever see a day. But I have to believe that your words and our words can live and can resonate. So I am inclined to vote in favor of the whole forced slate, knowing full well what that probably means, because your work mattered. Our deliberation mattered. The public comment matters. And I believe in that. Thank you.
Mr. Spencer.
Thank you, Dr. Hildreth, for your comments. I found that was rather inspiring. I really appreciate them. And as we discussed specific language or around the charter, and understand I am not of the legal profession, and yet from how I look at it logically and from I think most of the voters that put this board in place would think about it as in, so if we're saying that the police department has the authority to execute discipline, and we have the authority to recommend discipline, and what these recommendations are saying, basically, you have to seriously consider and explain why you're not following recommendations. To me, that makes perfect sense. And I think it makes perfect sense to all the folks in the community, I would assume. I can't speak for everybody, but that's my assumption. Because essentially, to me, if you're saying, so you can make recommendations and you follow through, why is it that we cannot have, there's no language that says you can't seriously take this recommendation and follow through with it and explain your reasoning why. I think that these recommendations are bottom line. And I think that really these recommendations are what voters would probably already assume is already going on. And I think, again, strikes into the legitimacy of the organization and of the board as well. And that people look to this board and look to this organization for being able to make that kind of positive change in the community. And so I think for me, if my reading and my interpretation is correct and fair, then I'm in full support of all four as well, because I do not necessarily see, even if there are a little bit more technicalities within legal language that I personally may not necessarily have the full skill set to debate, work on right now, I don't necessarily think that we should let this sit. I think this is clear and to the core of our work, and I think it's also incredibly fair. I mean, I think what we're asking is basically saying, look, you have to understand that we also have this authority. We have this authority to make recommendations. And so what we're saying is that we can work on definitions together, but also this is our authority. And this is really to me, in my interpretation, this is affirming our authority in the charter. That if it's our purpose to make these recommendations, you have to seriously consider these recommendations and follow through and explain why not. And so that's all I have.
Judge Brown.
Let me be clear. I'm not in any way saying that the board does not have the authority to make the recommendations. I voted tonight for one that probably can't be carried out, and I agree with Dr. Hildreth. When we see something wrong, we have a right and a duty to recommend action. I fully support that. As I say, we need to recommend what we think is appropriate. My problem with this is we're getting over into trying to get, and I'm sorry, my hearing aids are fighting with each other. Sorry. They're binging at each other. So we have that authority and duty. The problem with my concern with these are we're getting over into legal issues as to the duty and such. You know, when the chief disagrees with us, I mean, part of the solution to that is that there's some publicity. We get some publicity. The board has recommended something. The chief has said no, and you get media looking at that, and that's where it brings heat on the department as to why they're disagreeing with us. I'm just concerned that these last three just get us over on a sidetrack. I think we ought to keep making our recommendations as we make them, as strong as we feel appropriate. And if the chief disagrees us, I think it's appropriate that we let the media know, and that brings some heat on the chief if he doesn't have a good reason. So that's my thought of it. But I in no way want to say that I think we're limited by Metro or anybody as to what our recommendations are. It's just I think we get into a problem when we start saying that they have more force than I think we can legally get at this point.
And I'd just like to recognize myself again. I do have concerns that, it's like specifications that, you have someone looking at one thing and someone's looking at the other, and you're surprised when they come out with different conclusions. And so that's what I have an issue with, because this preponderance of evidence, and then you have other cities, that are doing the same thing. And I guess I tend to, and I'm the chair, I'm impartial, but I tend to side with actually going ahead and proving them all, because this is a problem, because this goes down to the PRRs. That's why we can't. We don't have much of a chance if we're not looking at the same thing, in my opinion. So that's my little take. And now back in the chair's position. Okay, Ms. McCree.
I just want to take some time to echo what I've heard a couple of times tonight, and that is a concern for our legitimacy. Yes, we can continue to make recommendations, and the chief can continue to turn them down. But I can only speak for me. I was interested in becoming a member of this board because I thought that the decisions of this board make real life impacts on behalf of community members that have been harmed. And if our recommendations continue to be ignored, not accepted, we can't find some terms on which to agree with the chief, or for these reports to be accepted by the chief, then nothing is happening for the people who opted for us to be here. I think that thought, that concern needs to be front and center as we move into a vote for, or as we vote on this report. That's all.
Mr. Abdullah.
I'm going to be really, really brief. I have a really quick question, and I think Mr. Goddard brought this up earlier. What would it look like for us to be able to, instead of focusing on what happened in 2021, focus on what the Metro Police are working on now so that we can get out in front of it? Because I know if we continue to go back looking at old cases, it's going to always be this circle where we can never really catch up. So is it possible for us now to look at cases that they are looking at now and have some type of discussion on those cases now, even if we have to meet another day, because I know we've done that before, but even if we have to do that, can we look at it now to make a recommendation that actually means something versus going back and looking at or making a recommendation on something that they've already ruled against?
Well, I think just for some clarity purposes, when you say look at the cases that they're looking at, they don't necessarily have the same cases that we have, right? So when a complainant comes to us, the only way that they know, which is, I think, an issue that we're working towards, the only way that they know that a complainant has come to us and an officer has been compelled to come and speak with us is, number one, we have to set it up, the process with them, right, to get the officer to come in. If the officer refuses, the chief has to order that officer to come to us. Now, whether or not they are at that point deciding to open up their own investigation, I have no knowledge of that. And so when we get when the complainants come to us, they don't say, we asked, have you filed a complaint with any other agencies? And the majority of the time it's no. And so I think that is something that we need to look at and see if, in fact, once we're making our request, whether or not the police department at that time is also investigating and speaking to the officer and asking them questions. They won't have access to the complainant, but they could be. I don't know. So when you say get in front of them, in that regard, I don't know how. I don't know if that is how this is occurring. We have 2022 cases that the investigators are working on alongside getting out of the backlog. I do know that is occurring.
Mr. Milner.
I think that member Abdullah raises an excellent point, and then the timing of it explains a lot. But is there a way that we could or maybe not is there a way, but structurally, when we begin an investigation, if there's nothing criminal that's being alleged, would it make sense for us to somehow or another get some type of policy or some type of ruling, since we can recommend that not be dealt with internally until we resolve it? I know there's probably a lot of logistics associated with that, timing-wise, but certainly if we start an investigation, they are going to know about it because we're going to ask them to reveal certain information that lets them know we're starting an investigation. And I'm going right back to the same issue I've been discussing all night. Usurping the control and authority of this board, right? Is there a way that it can be understood, it can be agreed to, it can be looked upon as, give us our opportunity to make our recommendation? That's what the charter says. It says that we have the power to make recommendations, but we need the opportunity to make that recommendation. I think that helps to keep us viable. And I think that's consistent with what we're hearing from Metro Legal, okay? And I I would like to have that posed in a very direct way to Metro Legal in terms of, well, I won't necessarily use the terms like cease and desist, but in other words, let us.
Like a stay?
A stay, if you will. Thank you very much. Like a stay until such time that we resolve the issue. That gives us, Member McCree, that gives us our viability and our power and our authority back. I think that's a huge issue, and it's something I'd like to see if we have the means and authority to address.
Mr. Goddard.
I want to make a comment on that. What had been discussed some earlier and what I thought is, it's the tension, and I've got a suggestion, it's a tension between the civil service rules, and if something is being addressed internally, there's some time frames that are out there. However, the charter clearly implies that we're supposed to be able to review a case of a citizen complaint and make a recommendation, and that go to the chief of police, not for him to file and already done that file, but to consider in making his disciplinary decision. And I think, again, I may be a little biased here, but I think engaging the police department and Metro Legal in laying out this tension and saying we need to have a process, a calendar, a workflow, a time frame that achieves both ends. Doesn't violate an officer's civil service rights if there's an internal investigation. Does it put us in a position we find ourselves in over and over that is absolutely untenable, in my opinion. That's my thought on how best to address that. There may be other ways to address that, but we need to do something to address it, in my opinion.
I think Mr. Yoon and then Judge Brown.
And I may be wrong, but the lawyer in me just thinks everybody's talking to me for an answer, so I'm going to volunteer. It could be the lawyer bias in me, but
I didn't mean to put you on the spot.
No.
I'm certainly interested in what you have to say.
It wasn't just you. I think everybody's speaking directly to me, but I thought we actually made eye contact, Mr. Milner, and you actually were sort of soliciting an answer from me. So, yeah, and I wholeheartedly support, and I really appreciate this board. You guys are great. But I think we should absolutely start that conversation. I think one suggestion that was made last December was actually our MOU actually says as part of its provisions, the OPA, the chief, and the MCOB shall review this annually for updates to see what tensions like this should be addressed. So I think that could go. I also want to just answer to some of the things that I think some of the board members have touched upon and just reflect back to you what y'all have been saying so eloquently tonight about what we do now in the short term to meet the needs of the community with the resources that we do have, absolutely. Maybe that looks like changing our timelines, deprioritizing, reprioritizing different things. But I definitely don't want to lose sight, and I don't think the board is suggesting that either, of the ultimate vision is to do the job that the community oversight referendum put in place. And it is a shot into the future, and it is not currently being met. And for somebody who's worked at the Public Defender's Office for 10 years and then in private practice, seeing the injustice of being inadequately resourced, going to work every day and redefining victory, trying to find new ways to do injustice but still find satisfaction from the work, that is not something I think that this board wants to re-enter into or see replicated in this oversight board. It's a very debilitating thing to see fellow public defenders, members of the bar, where the alcoholism rate, the suicide rate is so great. I think it's a direct reflection of seeing the system play out day in and day out with a lack of resources and being told, you're doing great work, keep going in there and, for the butchers. So we have a big backlog. We have a small amount of resources to do it with, and there are absolutely 100 ways that we can accomplish the work that you're asking us to do by shifting some things. But what we don't want to do is re-entrench sort of this disparity in resources from us and the OPA. Not only do they have 11 investigators to our 3, not only have we been without a couple of key positions for the last few months, in addition to the OPA, each precinct, and there are 8, I believe, does their own investigations of what they consider to be lower level. So even though some investigations they're doing and some investigations we're doing and there's no crossover, some investigations we are doing, but in addition to the 11, they've got the other 1,700 police department employees to rely upon to help them with their workload.
And if I may, when I think about what Attorney Yoon just said and what I've heard from all of you, it takes me back to what we heard today in this PRR. The fact that the police department disciplined at the lowest level, and you heard a compelling statement from this complainant about what occurred with her. I think that this conversation is one that we need to really think about when we talk the whole implementation of these recommendations, because the police department has not been able to hold themselves accountable. We see that time and time again, and we saw it today. We saw a woman say that they pointed a gun at her head, and then what they did was they disciplined the officer with a written reprimand because he knowingly put himself in harm's way. Not that she was in harm's way, but that he put himself in harm's way, and they upheld that. And so I think that this whole conversation, we have to center that in this conversation when we start talking about these recommendations and how we want to move forward on holding the police department accountable, which is one of our core missions and values. And I think that accountability, of course, looks different for everyone, but we know what it looks like because we hear from the people that come in and tell us what it is, what they're experiencing 18 months later, the residual effect of this trauma she is still experiencing. So.
Okay, Mr. Milner, and Mr. Milner. No. I didn't want you to think it was directed at you. But I just want to remind people of time. We're getting close to 8, but Mr. Milner.
I appreciate what is being said, and also Dr. Hildreth, your passionate, statement about our charge and what our vision is and is not. But that statement that was read from Metro Legal, it acknowledges, it sounds like to me, our right to make recommendations. I think it acknowledges that. I need to know if Metro Legal is going to enforce that by giving us a timeline that fits into the disciplinary process, where our recommendation, which they have acknowledged is our right, is more than just a scofflaw. Okay? And I would like to see some kind of, I think it's something that we may be able to get some answers on that might help us to fulfill our charge.
Dr. Hildreth.
Thank you. To that point, and I'm wondering if this is a good time to invoke, I think that is Section 14 of the Memorandum of Understanding, the annual review. This may be the sole agenda item. And so it's a memorandum of understanding between this board and the police department, but if we ask Metropolitan Legal to actually be a part of the discussion, and that the topic is the interdigitation of the timelines, that is, let's write a section 15 or 16 that talks about what that can be. And so being the old head again, what that usually looks like is there is a motion to go back to the bargaining table with the memorandum of understanding. A negotiator, or I think a pair of negotiators, could be voted upon by the board, and then they go and do that work. That's an idea. It could be turned into motion if anybody was interested.
Before or after we vote on the PA?
Yeah.
Yep.
I'll come back.
Okay. Okay, is there any other discussion? Okay.
Is that where we are?
I think that's where Mr. Attorney Yoon had.
I guess only if this was actually going to be turned into a motion, it would be Section 15 of the MOU, subsection B. Both parties agree to engage in a joint review of the MOU's terms at least annually and to discuss in good faith any revision.
Okay.
So it's already there. We don't.
No, but we have a process for getting back to the table. That's the authorization to get to the table, but we vote to do it and we nominate mediators. negotiators to do it. But I'm willing to make that motion after the business at hand, which is a motion to.
And the policy advisory report. So is there a motion of any kind? And I thought you, Mr. Milliner, said that you had a motion.
Absolutely. In light of discussions, I'd like to make a motion, Mr. Chair, that we adopt recommendations 1 through 4 of the policy report.
Is there a second?
A second.
Well, clarification on the motion, is that for all or is that for one at a time? Yeah.
No, all involved.
All,
involved,
okay.
1 through 4.
Okay. It's been properly moved and second that we approve the entire policy advisory report. Is there any focused discussion? Okay. I will do a roll call vote. We will start with Mr. Holloway.
Aye.
Judge Brown.
No.
Ms. McCree.
Aye.
Mr. Goddard.
Nay.
Mr. Whistle.
Aye.
Aye for the chair.
Aye.
Okay, Ms. Spencer.
Aye.
Mr. Abdullah.
Aye.
Mr. Milner.
Aye.
All right. The motion passes. So now the next item then would be, is there another motion from Dr. Hilder?
Thank you, Chair. I move that we invoke Section 15 that indicates that the board can ask for a return to the negotiation of the Memorandum of Understanding between MMPD and this body. And so how do I want to do this? So that I move that we do that, and if this motion passes, that we then nominate 2 negotiators to carry forth this task.
Okay. Is there a second?
Second.
Okay. Was that Mr. Whistle or Mr. Abdullah? Which one was first?
I'll second.
Okay, Mr. Abdullah, second. Okay. It's been properly moved and second that we go back to the negotiating table on the MOU. Is there any focused discussion?
May I make remarks?
Okay.
So now that we're at focused discussion, if anybody wants to self-volunteer to be the negotiators, I will accept an amendment to the motion to move that we go back to negotiation with the 2 named individuals.
I would say I would love to be on that, but I'm a short timer, so I can't do it.
Yes.
Okay. So I heard Mr. Milliner. Okay.
Can we nominate others?
Well, I think we're asking for volunteers.
Well, but I see volunteering and hands going in that direction. Yeah.
I'll be willing to.
Okay.
I'm aligned with the board on this one, maybe.
Okay, I saw Mr. Milliner and Mr. Goddard, and I thought I heard Mr. Whistle.
No, I had a question.
Judge.
But I think I answered. So
Judge Brown has his hand up.
Okay, and Judge Brown. Okay.
So are we amending this motion that we go back to the bargaining table with members Brown, Goddard, and Milner as the designated negotiators?
Okay.
And I think that
Is there an amended second? Mr. Abdullah, do you still second that motion?
I'll second it.
Okay. Okay, it's been properly moved and second that we go back to the negotiating table with the MOU, and the negotiators would be Dr. Hildreth, Mr. No?
Done 3. I'm retired.
Oh, okay. Slight misinterpretation there. With all that wisdom. So anyway, so it would be Mr. Milliner, Mr. Goddard, and Judge Brown. Okay. All right. Is there any, did I ask for focused discussion? Okay. All in favor of the motion, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Okay, the motion carries. Okay. All right, let's move on here. Okay, next on the agenda is public comment. Are there any comments in person, or is there any written comments? Okay, all right, hearing none. Okay, so the next item then, we will move to new business and announcement. Is there any new business and announcements? And I had one, Mr. Yoon?
Let's kill all the lawyers, I think, was somebody's announcement. But that being said, I really did think that we, as a housekeeping tool, June is our next meeting. It's fully half of the year. Can you believe it? We need to have the nominating committee meet by June 22nd, and the budget quarterly updates with the line items usually side by side of the annual projected versus the, what has actually been spent. And then the third thing was performance evaluations for staff. But just wanted to announce that to the board, that these are the housekeeping things that I think the board has indicated in the past you want to be kept in the loop of and make sure that we're following all the charters, all the rules, all the bylaws.
Okay, and thank you for bringing that up about the nominating committee. And I wanted to ask, and I believe it's supposed to be three individuals for the nominating committee. I was asking if there's anyone that would like to volunteer to be on the nominating committee.
Hello.
Okay, Dr. Hildreth. Just need two more. Okay, Mr. Abdullah. I'm still waiting. It's 8 o'clock, 8:07. Mr. Holloway.
All right.
Okay.
I was reaching for my button.
Okay.
Matrix.
Okay. So that will be the nominating committee, and you all will, I guess, schedule a meeting, and then we'll get your chair and everything. So with the nominating committee. Now we also, Attorney, you mentioned about the budget. Is that?
Just we'll be bringing that up for the executive committee.
Yes.
Probably, and also the general board has to look at this quarterly as well. So usually, June is the last fiscal cycle, so that makes sense. And then July will be the new fiscal cycle. So a first review would perhaps be in September, December, March, and then again in June.
Okay. So all that other is the executive committee. Okay. All right. Is there any other new business or announcements? If not, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
Second.
Okay, it's been properly moved and second. Okay, the meeting is adjourned and the time is 8:08 p.m. Thank you all for your service. Wow.
This has been a service of the Metro Nashville Network. If you would like to see this presentation again, or for more information on this and other programs, visit nashville.gov.